This is the story of the forgotten orphan who built Rolex. A young boy who lost everything, rebuilt his life from nothing, and went on to create one of the most powerful luxury brands in the world. Chapter 1. The Beginning of Rolex. Rolex is one of the most luxurious brands on Earth, and today it is valued at around $8 billion. Its story goes back more than 100 years, beginning with a teenage orphan whose inheritance was taken from him. With nothing but his willpower and desire to rise above hardship, he left his hometown and moved to a foreign country. After spending several years working and building experience, he chose to follow his passion and start a watchmaking business. He had no idea that this decision would help create the modern wristwatch, transform the entire watch industry, and build a billion-dollar empire. Chapter 2. A Series of Misfortunes. Hans Wilsdorf was born in Kulmbach, Germany on March 22, 1881, to Anna and Johann Daniel Wilsdorf. He was the second of 3 children. His family owned a fairly successful iron goods business that had been passed down from his grandfather. This placed the family comfortably within the middle class. Sadly, his mother became seriously ill and passed away in 1892. Then, just 1 year later, his father also died, leaving Hans an orphan at only 12 years old. Hans and his siblings were placed in the care of his mother's brothers. His uncles quickly decided to sell the family business and use part of the money to pay for the children's education. They sent all 3 children to a respected boarding school called Ernestinum Coburg in Bavaria, Germany. At first, Hans strongly disliked this decision. Living in a new town made him unhappy and isolated. He was treated like an outsider and was often mocked by other boys because of his religion. To cope with his difficult childhood, Hans turned his attention toward his studies. As he grew older, he came to understand that although he disliked his uncle's choice at the time, it played an important role in his future success. He later explained that his uncles were not careless about his future. However, their decisions forced him to become independent at a very young age. This taught him to take care of his possessions and rely on himself. Looking back, Hans believed that this early independence was one of the main reasons behind his success. Hans loved reading and became a very capable student. He was especially strong in mathematics and languages. He learned both French and English, and he was always fascinated by travel. Hans understood that languages would be useful, and later in life, they would become extremely important to his career. While at school, he became friends with a Swiss boy. This friend told him stories about his hometown, La Chaux-de-Fonds. La Chaux-de-Fonds was a Swiss city with a long and respected history in watchmaking. Hans became deeply interested in the place. Chapter 3. Leaving Germany. Eventually, Hans became tired of the life he was living in Germany. At 19 years old, he left the boarding school and moved to Geneva, Switzerland. There, he found work as an apprentice at an international pearl exporting company. The company bought pearls from different markets, then sorted, graded, and packaged them before selling them to jewelers. Hans noticed that the company did not really manufacture anything itself. Yet, despite this, it still earned strong profits. He studied the company's business methods closely and learned as much as he could. For someone his age, he was earning good money. One day, Hans received a letter from a friend. The friend offered him a job at a company called Kuno Korten. Kuno Korten was one of the largest high-quality watchmaking companies of that period. The company exported around 1 million Swiss francs worth of pocket watches every year. It also produced some of its own watches from the ground up. The company was located in La Chaux-de-Fonds, the city Hans had always wanted to visit. Even though his current job was more financially useful to him, his fascination with the city and the watch business was stronger. So, in 1900, Hans moved to La Chaux-de-Fonds to work for Kuno Korten. He was hired as an English correspondent and clerk. This was because he could read and write English, a skill he had learned during school. His monthly salary was 80 Swiss francs. Hans was also responsible for winding hundreds of pocket watches every day. He had to check that each watch was keeping accurate time. This gave him a deep understanding of watchmaking. He gained valuable knowledge about how many different types of watches were made. But his time at the company did not last long. After only 2 years at Kuno Korten, he had to return to Germany to serve in the army. Once his military service ended, Hans was 22 years old. He then moved to London, England to work for another company that specialized in high-quality watches. This time, he was given a larger responsibility. His job was to increase the company's sales. During the 2 years he worked there, he managed to bring in more clients and grow the company's sales over time. By then, Hans was already thinking seriously about starting his own watch business. He continued learning everything he could to prepare for that future. During this same period, he met his future wife, Florence Frances May Crotty. They married not long afterward. Chapter 4. Wilsdorf and Davis. One day, Hans sat outside with his much older brother-in-law, Alfred James Davis. The two men spoke about life and their plans for the future. Hans told Alfred that he felt ready to launch his own watch business. The only thing he still needed was capital. Alfred had money and knew how passionate Hans was about watches. Even though Hans was still very young, Alfred decided to take a chance on him. He told Hans that he was willing to invest in the business. The two men shook hands. In 1905, they founded Wilsdorf and Davis Limited. This company would eventually become Rolex. They partnered with a Swiss watch company called Hermann Egler. Hermann Egler was based in Switzerland. Wilsdorf and Davis began importing Swiss watch movements into England and placing them inside watch cases. They also opened an office in Bienne, Switzerland, to support the partnership. Soon, the company specialized in distributing timepieces at affordable prices. Although Hans loved watches, there was one major part of the industry that he did not like. That problem was pocket watches. At the time, wristwatches were mostly worn by women as jewelry. Many people did not take wristwatches seriously. The main reason was that they were not seen as accurate. Wristwatches were much smaller than pocket watches. Because of their smaller size, they needed smaller movements. These smaller movements often caused the watch to run too fast or too slow because of tiny mechanical details. This was why pocket watches remained more popular at the time. Their larger, heavier design was also considered more masculine. But Hans mostly saw pocket watches as inconvenient. He found it annoying to reach into his pocket every time he wanted to check the time. This was especially inconvenient when his hands were busy. Back then, many people believed it was nearly impossible to create a wristwatch that could keep accurate time and survive everyday use. Hans believed otherwise. He believed that pocket watches would almost completely disappear. He also believed that wristwatches would permanently take their place. Hans predicted that wristwatches would eventually become normal for everyone. He fully committed himself to creating the perfect wristwatch. Over the following years, he traveled across many European countries. He met countless watchmakers and discussed the smallest technical details of watches. During those years, he also began releasing his own wristwatches. He started doing this in the same year that he founded his company. Watch after watch, Hans worked to create a more reliable, higher quality wristwatch for both men and women. He applied the lessons he had learned from other watchmakers during his travels. Soon, the company began gaining momentum. By 1908, it had become one of the leading watch firms in England. Chapter 5. The Birth of Rolex. By this point, Hans wanted to rename his company. He wanted a name that sounded elegant, premium, catchy, and easy to pronounce in any language. It also had to be short enough to fit neatly on a watch dial. He spent a great deal of time combining letters from the alphabet. Eventually, the name Rolex was created. Hans immediately felt that it was the perfect name. A few days later, in 1908, he registered Rolex as a trademark for Wilsdorf and Davis Limited. Over the next few years, Rolex became known for producing high-quality wristwatches. Wealthy customers were already beginning to wear them. But soon after, the First World War began. Many businesses struggled to survive during the war. Watch companies were among those affected. Some firms even had to close down. But Rolex did not. In fact, the war made Hans's company even more famous. This was because Rolex wristwatches had already built a reputation for reliability. Many soldiers were given Rolex watches instead of pocket watches. Wristwatches were easier and safer to use in battle. They also helped soldiers coordinate attacks more effectively because of their accurate timekeeping. By 1914, the company had grown significantly. Rolex employed 60 people and had large, open office spaces in London. To strengthen its reputation even further, Rolex received the first ever wristwatch chronometer rating from Switzerland. This was followed by a Class A Certificate of Precision from London's Kew Observatory. These achievements made customers more confident in the brand. But Hans still faced major problems. In 1914, Britain introduced a 33% tax on companies registered in Great Britain that exported goods across international borders. This became a serious issue for Hans. To avoid these taxes, he moved the company headquarters from London to Bienne, Switzerland. There was another reason behind this move. Because of the First World War, many people in Britain had become hostile toward Germans. Hans Wilsdorf was clearly a German name. Even though the Rolex name had already been registered, the company was still operating in England under the name Wilsdorf Davis. This caused the business to be viewed negatively. As a result, Hans completely changed the company name from Wilsdorf Davis Limited to Rolex Watch Corporation Limited in 1915. Years later, Hans also registered Rolex's famous crown logo. That 5-point crown became a permanent part of the design on Rolex watch dials. In 1919, Rolex moved its main office from Bienne to Geneva. The company's main office remains in Geneva today. From that point onward, Rolex focused on making watch movements in Bienne. Those movements were then transported to Geneva. In Geneva, they were carefully tested for accuracy. They were then finished with high-class designs and prepared for sale. It was in Geneva that Hans and his team fully committed themselves to improving the technical performance of the wristwatch. Hans believed they had to create a watch case so tight that the movement would be permanently protected. It needed protection from dust, sweat, water, heat, and cold. Only then, he believed, could the perfect accuracy of a Rolex watch be guaranteed. Through patience and determination, this effort eventually paid off in a major way. In 1926, Rolex released a model that changed the watch industry forever. That model was the Rolex Oyster. It was the first waterproof wristwatch in history. The Oyster had a tightly sealed case that protected the delicate movement inside. This protection made the watch waterproof. Hans knew the invention was revolutionary. He also knew people would be interested in it. But instead of launching it quietly, he waited for the perfect moment to introduce it to the world in a creative way. Chapter 6: The Genius Mind of Marketing. In 1927, Hans heard about a woman from London named Mercedes Gleitz. She claimed she was capable of swimming across the English Channel. The English Channel is a body of water about 20.5 miles wide that separates England and France. Many people did not believe her claim. So she planned to attempt the swim again in front of thousands of spectators. This time, the water temperature was much colder. Hans immediately saw a marketing opportunity. He encouraged Mercedes to wear a Rolex Oyster around her neck during the swim. After swimming for more than 10 hours, she was pulled from the water close to freezing. She had completed around 4/5 of the journey across the channel. The swim itself was not a full success, but the Rolex Oyster came out of the water in perfect working condition. The public became fascinated by the watch. Hans quickly followed the attention by placing an advertisement in the London Daily Mail about the event. This was the moment Rolex gained international fame as a revolutionary watch brand. To build even more excitement, Hans displayed Rolex Oyster watches inside fishbowls. These fishbowls contained real fish and were placed in the windows of Rolex dealerships. People walking by could see the watches submerged in water. The strategy worked brilliantly. People became hooked on the product. By then, Hans decided to advertise Rolex heavily. In 1928, he worked with Evelyn Leigh, one of the top British models of the time. She helped promote his watches. Of course, some photographs showed her wearing a wristwatch inside a fishbowl. The publicity continued. In 1933, Rolex Oyster watches appeared in newspapers again. This time, they were connected to a flight over Mount Everest. Crew members wore Rolex watches during the flight and were pleased to find that the watches remained fully functional afterward. Another example came in 1935. The famous driver Malcolm Campbell set a speed record of around 300 miles per hour while wearing his Rolex. Hans asked Malcolm for permission to use the achievement in Rolex publicity. Malcolm agreed and refused to be paid. By this stage, people no longer saw Rolex only as a beautifully designed, high-quality watch. They also saw it as reliable, durable, and technically advanced. It became a wristwatch that people could trust for daily use. In business, great marketing can be essential to making a company successful. Chapter 7: New Models and Innovation. During this period, Rolex continued to impress the public with new ideas. In 1931, the company introduced an improved model called the Rolex Oyster Perpetual. It was the first waterproof and self-winding wristwatch. The original Rolex Oyster had already been a major achievement, but there was still one problem. The watch had to be manually wound regularly. Because the case was sealed so tightly, this made winding more difficult. The wearer had to unscrew the oyster crown, wind the watch, and then screw it closed again. Creating a self-winding watch had been a dream for centuries. Many people had tried to perfect the idea, but none had successfully done it before Rolex. From 1934 to 1940, Hans also produced high-quality watches outside the Rolex company. These watches were trademarked under his own name. However, the project was discontinued because French, British, and American markets had strong negative feelings toward Germany. Even with all his achievements, Hans still struggled at times to succeed in the market. His German name made things harder for him. Because of this, he often had to work twice as hard to build a successful company. When World War II began, Rolex was hit hard. Exporting products from Switzerland to major European markets became difficult and expensive. Hans was deeply frustrated by the situation. Then, another tragedy struck. His wife passed away in 1944. To honor her memory, Hans created the Wilsdorf Foundation. The foundation was a charitable organization dedicated to social causes. Shortly before his death, Hans transferred full ownership of Rolex to the Wilsdorf Foundation. The foundation still owns and controls Rolex today. As a result, Rolex will never go public or be sold in the usual way. It is essentially owned by a charitable foundation. After World War II ended, Rolex began growing rapidly. In 1946, Rolex sold its 50,000th certified Rolex chronometer. The company had started certifying these chronometers 20 years earlier. By 1947, Rolex had reached 100,000 certified chronometers. That meant the company doubled the total from the previous 2 decades in only 1 year. This success was supported by a new model released in 1945. That model was the Rolex Datejust. The Datejust was the first waterproof, self-winding wristwatch to show the date of the month on the dial. Almost 10 years later, Rolex released another groundbreaking model. This was the Rolex Day-Date. The Day-Date was the first waterproof, self-winding wristwatch to show both the date of the month and the day of the week. Watches with these features are still common today. In many ways, they became a standard design for everyday wristwatches. During the 1950s, Rolex continued introducing a series of advanced watches. The most famous of these was the Rolex Submariner. It was introduced in 1953. It was the first deep-diving waterproof wristwatch capable of reaching 100 meters underwater without failing. Chapter 8: The Legacy of Hans Wilsdorf. Hans Wilsdorf died in 1960. After his death, Rolex began positioning itself more clearly as the luxury brand it is today. The company focused its marketing on exclusivity and high society. Another important factor came in 1985. Rolex began manufacturing its watches with 904L steel. This steel is highly durable and expensive. Rolex became the first watch company to use it. This is one of the reasons Rolex watches are so expensive today. Today, Rolex remains the most recognizable watch brand in the world. Hans Wilsdorf began life as an orphan with almost nothing. Yet he followed his own path and changed the watch industry forever. His passion for design and technical innovation made him one of the most influential figures in watchmaking. His impact can still be seen today whenever someone wears a Rolex. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.